Guys, it's GirlGotGame with my final thoughts on London Detective Mysteria. First off, I'll just start by saying how much I love this game. It's absolutely incredible, a work of art, really, in more ways than one. I used to be really into mystery novels in my teens. I read tons of Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, but only really got into Sherlock Holmes in my early 20s, funnily enough. I've read a couple of the Miss Marple books and other various Agatha Christie novels as well. So to say I'm a fan of the mystery genre is an understatement. I loved reading about how these various characters would find clues and secret societies and put it all together to solve the mysteries, so it's pretty safe to say I was going to fall in love with this game very easily. So yeah, if I was just going to summarize everything into a nice little box here, my feelings about this game, I loved every moment of it. Let's start off with the story. It's very well written. The common route is full of mini mysteries that were very engaging and solved in very logical ways. Each of the individual routes had bigger overarching stories with hints at what's going on behind the scenes and little reveals here and there through each story. Definitely had no complaints about the story. Of course, some of the stories and individual routes were more interesting or engaging than others, but I think that really would just come down to personal taste for most. And there wasn't any storylines where I felt like the writing was rubbish or unbelievable. Everything flowed really nicely, and I like that each individual route had its own distinct flavor, if you will, to it. Of course, have to talk about the art. I feel like I'm spoiled forever after this with art in future games that I play. The sprites, the incredible amount of detailed backgrounds and items was just a feast for the eyes. The ever-changing nature of the art really helped make you feel like the story was moving along too, and that you weren't stuck in a scene for any long amount of time with these super long monologues or anything like that. So the art really helped the story feel like it was moving along, which was super nice. Even if I am now forever spoiled for background art forevermore. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the gorgeous CG art. They were all so beautiful. It's hard to pick what would be my favorite. The lighting, the colors. You guys know how many games I've played through on the channel. And never have I ever had my husband tell me how beautiful the thumbnails for this game have been as much as with this game. I've literally lost count by now how many times he would yell from the other room, Are you playing that London Mysteria game right now? Yeah, why? I just had your latest video recommended to me and wow, is that CG beautiful. So many times. So yeah, definitely zero complaints about the art in any way, shape, or form. And finally, the music. So many beautiful pieces of magic. Some real earworms in there too. I've been humming the one piece in particular that sounds so much like the theme to the BBC Sherlock show since I started this game, basically. It's lots of fun, quirky pieces, beautiful moving ones that tug at your heart. And then there's the one in the background that I had to include into this video because I wanted to listen to it for forever. All in all, this game has a complete package that's a delight to look at and listen to. Of course, I can't comment on the voice acting since I played with it off, but if everything else was of this caliber, then I can only imagine how well done the voice acting would be as well. Alright, now that I'm done talking about the game as a whole, I want to talk a bit about and give some love to our protagonist, Miss Emily Whiteley. She has such an interesting backstory. Definitely gave me some strong Black Butler vibes when we started this game, minus the deal with the devil aspect, of course. Well, we never did get confirmation either way on Pendleton, so the jury's still out on that one, I guess. But otherwise, young noble, parents brutally murdered, mansion burned down and rebuilt exactly as it was. Both have hellishly good butlers. Detective with a special ring, works for Her Majesty Queen Victoria. I guess in short, I'm explaining why I'm going to go and rewatch Black Butler for like the 4 billionth time or whatever after finishing this game, but you get the idea. Of course, one big difference between Black Butler's protagonist Seal and our protagonist in the game Emily is she is not out to solve the mystery for revenge. She wants justice for her parents and answers as to why someone would want people as good as them killed. In that sense, she's actually like Batman. Well, she's more of a ray of light than Batman, though. I'm getting horribly sidetracked, aren't I? Whoops. Back to Emily. She's just lovely. She definitely has her own very well-established, strong personality. She loves sweets, she's inquisitive, she has a very unique way of looking at the world and its problems, and comes up with very creative solutions. She cares deeply about others, even though she's just met. She's fiercely loyal to her friends. She's extremely witty, able to keep up with Holmes pretty easily, and can dish out as good as she takes. She's brave, has a deadly fascination with foglit alleys, naive, and often gets herself into trouble. But no matter what's going on, she also has time to admire cute boys. Most importantly. And I could go on, but in short, I really love the protagonist they created for this game. She definitely has her own established personality and motivations. She's not just sitting on the sidelines watching the events play out, but she's taking an active role. She also gets along well with all the characters in the story. I loved seeing different parts of her personality get screen time depending on which route we were on, but no matter what, she definitely kept her sense of agency. It was a lot of fun getting to know her, and I'm definitely going to miss her and her positive, sunny disposition now that I'm done with this game. Okay, but we all know why we're really here. It's to rank these boys and their routes, and all the routes in general, really. So, without further ado, let's get to my personal ranking for this game, and I hope you'll please share yours, your own list down below as well. So, as per the usual, I'll start at the bottom, and this is for all the routes, all the marbles. I was going to separate it into other categories afterwards, but then realized my overall list order is already separated into side routes versus main routes for the most part. So, let's begin. So, right at the bottom, I'd have to put the Baker Street Boys route. While I did love having a Watson-Holmes duo route of sorts, the route was kind of all over the place to me. Holmes himself was definitely the best part of it. He was surprisingly sweet and attentive to Emily throughout. Watson was very strangely absent and hanging back for most of it, which I wasn't expecting. It definitely had a couple new pieces of music in it that were absolutely beautiful and among my favorites from the game. We also got a small smidgen of background into the ever-talented Pendleton when we heard his violin skills. But other than that, it didn't really add anything to the overall story of the game. The bombs from Holmes's epilogue showed up again here, but this time were more targeted towards Emily. But they don't play at all into the true ending. Slater is evil now for some reason. I mean, yes, I get that he was bullied, but it was an interesting twist, I guess. But I had a hard time believing it, and it was also not followed up on later. Another thing that was baffling was Morin showing up to this recital that was going on and then getting killed? Maybe? And then his body was snatched away from the yard? What was the point of that? Why did the bombing stop after Morin and Slater had died? Did the bombing stop? The whole storyline just lacked any kind of satisfaction to its ending, so that's why it's here at the bottom. Next up would be Sarah Marple's route. It's so unfortunate because she's such a sweetheart. She also was the only one who stayed with Emily during the foggy picnic scene, so she gets all my love for that, if nothing else. Sarah's definitely a strange and refined young lady, and her and Emily play off of each other really well, actually. I definitely enjoyed their friend dynamic a lot and wish we had seen more of them teaming up during the regular game. Her route didn't really add anything to the overall story, but it's very sweet and cute. The only thing I really didn't like is that Emily had completely lost her sense of purpose in that end. She barely graduated from the academy and seemed to have even lost interest in her parents' case. There was also something going on in the back that's hinted at by Holmes that he and Marple were in the know on, and an agreement was made to keep Emily in the dark about it, which I also didn't like. So, with all that in consideration, Marple ends up pretty low on my list. Coming up next is Mr. Seiji Kobayashi. And I know some of you are probably thinking, wait, didn't you have him listed above Watson before? And the answer is yes, I did. But after thinking it over, I felt like it was pretty unfair of me to do that to Watson, considering he had a fully fleshed out route, and Seiji didn't. But that being said, if Seiji had had a full route, I think he would have been pretty high on my list. I really love that small boy. He's so enthusiastic and brave. I love how he tells it like it is, and he calls out Akachi on his obvious love for Emily and fights him. But seeing this boy take it upon himself to do anything for her on his own route was super sweet. And I especially loved the very end of his route where he almost got the gumption up to tell her how he feels, but he can't quite do it. And then she called him by his first name, and his reaction to that was so sweet. I could definitely see the two of them getting together after his studies in Japan were complete. He and Emily get along so well. I really wish we had got a full route with him, but since it was only a side route, here he falls on my list. Next, I felt like I had to put the Grand End here. I really enjoyed it. We did get an answer to who was really behind Emily's parents' murder and the reasons for it, and I loved that all the boys had big parts to play in this one. Loved to see how they all rallied around their girl in her time of need. However, there was a lot left unanswered. Deliberately so, to be fair, based on how heavily a sequel is teased at the end of the Grand End's epilogue. But it was hard to have a satisfying ending with this, considering how open it was left, and knowing that there was no resolution to the story to be had other than my own crazy theories. I also felt like not enough time was really given to Emily in the Grand End, oddly enough. For it to be a culmination of her storyline, a lot of time was actually spent on Holmes, Moriarty, and Spellbound's crazy plan regarding artifacts and elixir. And I felt like Emily could have used more time with processing Earl Beckford's betrayal, how he plotted to kill her in this end, and I would have liked for her to have some back and forth with Moriarty herself when she learned the truth from him. But sadly, all that's missing here. With that said, if we were in an alternate timeline where the sequel to this game had been made, I feel like this would have been higher on my list because it would have got me super pumped for what's to come in said sequel with what was teased at the very end of this. But since that's not to be, I felt I had to put this route here on my list. And with that said, you can probably see from how my list is currently laid out why I didn't have to make the separate list for side routes versus main routes, since all the side routes are actually at the bottom of my list. So since that's done, let's move on to our main attractions, shall we? I'm sure it'll come as a surprise to no one that William H. Watson is who I put at the bottom of the boys. Our wall and Disney princess. I do feel badly for him. It's nothing personal, Watson. I'm just not a fan of childhood friend to lovers romances. It's nothing against you. Although it's not really childhood friends in his case, really. He ran into Emily one time by complete happenstance and fell hopelessly in love with her from that day forward when they were kids. I did think it was incredibly sweet that he had carried feelings for her for so long and that he recognized her instantly when they met years later. Poor boy had been forgotten by our girl, however. Oof. This route, it definitely gave me strong Eva Chizuru vibes from Hakuoki. My main problems with Watson's route, though, are as follows. Because Emily and Watson are so open and friendly with each other from the get-go, there's not a huge ramp-up in change between them when they go from friends to boyfriend-girlfriend. I mean, other than the smooching, obviously. But out of all the potential suitors she could end up with, I feel like Watson and Emily really changed the least throughout Watson's route. He spends the whole route feeling unworthy of her and not strong enough to protect her, even though this boy literally held onto several knives with his bare hands to protect her. My dude, you are too strong. But even by the end, he still feels not strong enough. And Emily doesn't really get to a level of comfort with him that she does with the other boys. I felt like with the other guys, there were varying degrees of levels where she was letting her guard down, able to cry in their presence, even if she didn't fully know why she was crying. But I never get the sense that Emily truly feels safe enough around Watson to do that. She's always faking a smile for him. What's confusing too is that he tells her at one point that he loves that about her, that she hides her fear and sadness with a smile, but then at the same time, he feels terrible and wants to see a genuine smile from her and not the fake one that she presents to the world. But that never really happens? Another thing that bothered me is because the whole driving point of Watson's route was for him to be a strong enough man worthy of Emily, I felt like Emily made the stupidest decisions out of all the routes on Watson's route. The amount of times she impulsively got herself into danger in this route was ridiculous. For the love of all things holy, Emily, stop running into foglit alleys where murderers are lurking. Are you mad, woman? I just felt, for someone as smart as Emily, it felt so out of character for her. I know the girl's impulsive, but that's too much. However, to end things on a positive note with Watson, I do want to say that his rivalry, there we go. His rivalry with Jack was unexpected, but really awesome. And also my heart definitely melted at the end of his route, where they went back to the area they first met, had the whole flower ring ceremony again, but with what definitely felt like a wedding vibe to it. I absolutely adored that part. All the same though, I think I gotta go with Pendleton on this one and have Watson at the bottom of the boys list for me. I gotta go with my boy Pendleton on this. Oh. Now, this is where my list starts to get extremely difficult to number. I've gone back and forth so many times with these boys and reshuffled them this way and that, but I believe I finally come to a decision, so here it goes. Locked in. Up next is Herlock Holmes. I suppose it's appropriate for our two Baker Street boys to be side by side, isn't it? I absolutely adored Herlock's route, though. Our sweet tsundere boy. His route was very exciting story-wise. Set up as a murderer and having to clear his name while also having to fight Lupin for Emily's love. There was a lot of twists and turns. And of course, in true tsundere fashion, there was quite a few love confessions that were dithered about back and forth between Emily and Holmes. I know we said I love you, but it was under duress, and now you're ignoring me, so you probably hate me, right? And he told me to stay away, so he doesn't feel the way I do, blah, 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 blah. You know, the typical stuff. It wasn't too overdone, thankfully. The final showdown with Morin was quite exciting, even though I never did find out what exactly his connection with Emily was, and I'm still salty about that. Plus, seeing Herlock and his dad patch things up was also really sweet. I also felt like Holmes and Emily have great chemistry together. There is a rivalry there between them of sorts. For all of Holmes's insults in her direction, you can tell she has earned his respect and that she truly confounds him and intrigues him. For her part, she can also dish out to Holmes as good as she receives, but can see through his hard outer shell to interpret his true motivations behind his words. She's even better at seeing through him than Watson, which is saying something. These two are constantly pushing and motivating each other to greater and greater achievements, and they both open up to each other in a way they don't with anyone else. The ending of his route was also great in that it paralleled their first meeting together with a cat mystery bringing them together, and all their friends setting up the big confession scene on the roof was just the best. And, of course, I have to say that spiciness in Holmes' epilogue was incredibly unexpected but very much welcome. All in all, I loved Holmes and Emily together, and the story of his route was excellent. Alrighty, after Herlock, I decided to put Jack Miller's as my number 3. Gosh, I had to think about our dear Jack the Ripper for a long time. What an absolute bean of a boy. I think the story of his route was my favorite. It was definitely the darkest in the game, but it was incredibly well written and extremely engaging. There was a ton of angst, of course, and Jack's route hit me with a ton of feels. Seeing the lengths he went to for Emily was absolutely amazing. Boy had lived an entire life in darkness, but did a complete 180 for her. I was so curious going into his route how the game was going to handle a romance with a serial killer, but it was handled extremely well. Jack's progression is natural. You can see right from the get-go that he's not really an evil person. Circumstances were what they were, and he had no reason to fight against it until Emily came along. He actually had grand aspirations of being a police officer when he was a kid. I hope one day he gets to realize that dream in the future. The introduction of Bradley in his route was very clever, since it was a clear highlight of the difference between the two. Both were raised in basically the same circumstances, but with Bradley, he was definitely evil. Talking about just the romance portion of this route too, Emily and Jack are extremely sweet together. You can see how deeply they care about each other, and they'll go to extreme lengths for each other. My only real downsides with this route was that the main focus was, of course, on Jack. Emily didn't really get all that much time for her own story in his route since there was so much going on with the Ripper investigation. That wasn't too much of a downside, since trying to shoehorn progression to her story would have felt like too much in a robust storyline as it was, but I thought it was still worth mentioning here. The main downside was I felt more focus should have been given to Emily coming to grips with the fact that Jack was a murderer. It's touched on very slightly here and there, but I feel she never is really given the time to think about that fact and come to terms with it. I really would have rathered that that was the plot point that the two needed to overcome in their relationship, rather than making Jack basically Pendleton 2.0 and having even more of a class divide between them going forward. The poor boy already had that going against him as it was, being from the East End. Making it more of a gap between them is just kicking him while he's down, in my opinion. I couldn't help but feel it would have been more interesting to see how the two of them tackle his turn on Spellbound. I don't know, maybe have Moriarty personally try to win Jack back over to the dark side in the epilogue. Now doing the grand end, we know Moriarty's hard up for loyal, talented underlings, and he had just lost both Bradley and Morin. Not to mention, I can't help but feel Jack got let go from the organization incredibly easily. If they weren't at the very least going to kill him for what he knew, then surely Moriarty would have tried to manipulate him back over, either by telling him something along the lines of, once a killer, always a killer. You will never be good enough for those so-called friends of yours. They will always look down on you, blah, 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 blah. Or, alternatively, offering him power and riches so that he could become someone worthy of Emily. That's just me spitballing, but you get the idea. Also want to say, I think Jack's CGs are my favorite, purely because in most of them, there's a darkness around Jack and a brightness to Emily when they're together in a scene, and I love that. That is so beautiful to me. Anyway, overall, I did love Jack's route, even if it was bittersweet, so he came in solidly at number 3 for me. Alright, number 2, our samurai boy from the east, Kenichiro Akachi, or Kenchan as we all know him. Funnily enough, he was the one who caught my eye when watching the trailer of this game. Of course, I did come to this right off the heels of Hakuoki, and had fallen in love with Keisuke Sanan, who, in my headcanon, is the grandfather of Kenichiro. The looks and vibes were just too similar, so I knew there was a good chance I was going to fall for him, and this boy did not disappoint. For a boy who's so uptight and rigid about being honorable and proper about everything, he really fell for Emily over the most interesting things. Of course, it started off with her being, beauty, an absolute sight for sore eyes when he first came to England, and he was so deeply appreciative of how she stood up for him and Kobayashi as foreigners. And after that, he was putty in her hands. Just watching her eat was enough to make him all embarrassed and flustered. I really liked how different his storyline was to everyone else's also. While Spellbound definitely played a big part in his story too, it hit completely differently. None of the major players were involved, and we saw a side of the organization that's not explored at all in the other routes with the human trafficking to China. In fact, most of the route focuses on the hardships of being away from home, facing racism, being kind to those who aren't kind to you, helping those in need even when it's difficult. Of course, there was also a lot of epic sword fights, which gave me such strong Hakuoki feels again. The only real downside I had with this route was Emily running headlong into danger again. It wasn't as bad as Watson's route, but there was definitely some common sense moments where she shouldn't have been as impulsive. I do get that they were trying to show that Akachi and Emily are both impulsive in their own ways and often get into trouble for it, but they help each other when that happens. But still, girl, you need a sus radar badly for shady individuals. Seriously. Other than that, I loved these two together. Of course, Kenchan is somewhat of a tsundere himself, though nowhere near to the extent Holmes is. Him being so cold to Emily about coming to Japan to protect her just because he was afraid of his own feelings and ability to keep her safe is a good example of this. But I loved how Seiji was there to give him some very tough love throughout. What a good assistant he is. And seeing Akachi's cool and collected facade drop whenever Emily was in any kind of danger just tugged at my heartstrings. In this instance, I must disagree with Pendleton. I will never understand why he was so against this boy. He definitely secured his spot for me as number 2. And finally, coming in at number 1, coming as absolutely no surprise to anybody, I'm sure, is our Clark Kent Superman, the one and only Monsieur Jean Lupin. You guys know me and my narcissists. I will say, I wasn't sure about him when we met his alter ego, John Lupin, to start. But from the moment he flew away with Emily, on a moonlit night with his awesome theme playing in the background, he also flew away with my heart, too. It was his from that moment on, and he kept it right to the end. I must say, my amusement was constantly tickled by the fact that an entire class of England's greatest detectives could not deduce that John Lupin and Jean Lupin were the same person. That was so funny to me. I ended up really admiring the dedication Lupin had to his schoolboy identity. You have got to be committed to injure yourself intentionally over and over. I'm sure he must have planned most, if not all of those accidents, quotation marks, accidents as well, which makes it even funnier to me. This lover of beauty was of course struck immediately by Emily's beauty both inside and out. She was the only one who was truly kind to him as John, and he also admired her fiery temperament and bravery when she was going up against Jean. There is something so incredibly charming about him. He's absolutely nothing but trouble, and yet you can't help but love him even when he's being aggravating. His overall story arc was also very interesting to me. Learning that he had some really deep personal motivations for what he does was unexpected and very touching. Finding out about his mom and the tragedy behind that story was very moving, and to learn that Moriarty was the cause of that for very interesting reasons, my mind was just blown. Actually, hey, wait, hold on, quick segue here before I forget. I was thinking about this after the whole Moriarty Jr. Lupin meetup in the Grand End. So, with Moriarty's fondness for Lupin's mom, do you guys think it's possible that Moriarty Jr. and Lupin are half-brothers? I definitely don't think Lupin's mom would have been unfaithful to Arson, but I could see Moriarty taking what he wanted without consent, shall we say. He did have her necklace, after all. I'm just spitballing, but I had to get that crazy theory of mine out since I'll never get another chance, probably. And I've been thinking about it ever since then. Now where was I? Oh yeah, I was going to talk about Arson, actually. I absolutely adore Lupin's father. He's fantastic, and I love how he was constantly cheering his son on and actively working to get him together with Emily. You love to see a dad encourage his son along in his romantic endeavors. I also really loved that the reason for Lupin being resistive of Emily wasn't because of her having to win him over. He fell for her ages ago, but he didn't want the same fate that befell his mom to happen to her either. He had already lost one woman he cared about and wasn't going to let it happen again. But he definitely needs her in his life. She did keep him from committing murder out of revenge, after all. Lupin and Emily's relationship dynamic is also just really fun in of itself. Enemies to Lovers is so good, and it was done really well here. I felt like everything progressed very naturally, and Emily really did struggle for a long time with the fact that she had fallen for a criminal. Having that huge turning point with him saving her after she fell off the cliff was my absolute favorite moment of this game. And not just because we had that unexpectedly very sexy CG, which I was totally unprepared for. But yeah, the whole lead up to the scene, what changed between them during it, Emily finally getting a glimpse at the true man behind both masks of John and Jean was just awesome. Everything I love in good storytelling basically happened in that scene, and if I wasn't invested before, I definitely was after that. I think this was the route where I cried the most on, too. Just because there was so many times he went to say goodbye to her. Oh, especially the moment when he pickpocketed his mom's necklace to her after kissing her goodbye. And then I was as angry at him as Emily was when he'd show up a day later after making me cry over him like that. Oh, but then the ending, he shows up at school and whisks her away again and counts down for the final time, but pledges this time to stay with her after that. Oh, it's just so beautiful. Okay, I think you probably get the idea by now. I could talk about Lupin forever. I love that boy. And I didn't even talk about the craziness that is Pendleton, the Pendleton, trusting and approving of him the most out of all the boys. I'm still not over that. Maybe Pendleton and I are more alike than I thought. We seem to have similar tastes in these boys for the most part. I don't know how to feel about that. Anyways, In summary, Lupin definitely won my heart over completely and was an easy pick for me for number 1. And there you have it, my definitive list. I also wanted to have some bonus mentions here, just for funsies. Favorite teacher absolutely has to go to Mr. Mackenzie. I'm going to miss saying good morning to our depressed, dead-looking teacher. Boy needs some sun. What a long-suffering man he is for putting up with his crazy class of students. Best buddy cop duo. Need to shout out Lestrade and Ryan. Their antics were so good and never failed to put a smile on my face. Ryan definitely deserves a promotion for his good insight into so many of these cases. Best Dad award goes to Arsène Lupin for me. He was so much fun, and I loved his interactions with his son. And he was also, I think anyways, the most attractive of the dads. Worst dad definitely goes to Colonel Morin. Not that he had any biological children in the game, but he definitely did not raise his kids right. So you get the worst dad award, Morin. Best boys theme song goes to Lupin. It's so perfect for him, but with a notable mention for Jack, because Jack's theme is an absolute bop, and I love it. Most notable person missing from the game, John Watson, or Watson Sr. Where was that man? I need some Watson Sr. in my life. Most useless character award goes to the butler that stands behind Moriarty's wheelchair. Why do you have a face? Why do you exist? You serve no purpose. Are you telling me Moriarty can have not one, but 2 secret compartments for shotguns on his wheelchair, but couldn't come up with a contraption that would roll him around without assistance? Why does he have a butler? Why does his butler have a unique look? Why couldn't one of the hooded men be pushing you around? I'm so irrationally angry at that character. I'm never gonna get over it. Nah. I'm gonna calm down. Alright, speaking of Moriarty, best villain has to go to Professor Moriarty. He's so sinister. It has to go to him. Most mysterious person award has to go to our butler Pendleton. What an enigma that man is, and we've just barely scratched the surface with him. I have so many theories regarding him, and I don't know if they'll ever get answered. Sad face. Most infuriating character has to go to Mycroft Jr. because I pined away for him all game after seeing him in the bloody opening trailer, and he didn't show up until the end. What a rude man. Rude. Definitely a Holmes. And finally, hottest mad lad with a top hat who has an obsession with chocolate that had absolutely no business in stealing my heart away when he only deigned to show himself at the very end of this game, and who I can't smooch award. Yes, I know this award's name is way too long and also super specific. Shut up. It goes to Moriarty Jr. I will be forever sad I can't share a cup of hot chocolate with you, my love. Think of me when you drink hot chocolate in Paris. And finally, on a little more of a serious note, I thought I'd also briefly rank the epilogues. At the bottom, I would list Watson's, just because it was super unmemorable for me, and the only thing I really remember with any clarity is Pendleton grumbling about him and threatening to throw his flowers out. I literally don't remember anything else about it. So, I'm like, that's going at the bottom. Next, I would list Jack's epilogue. It was super sad and frustrating because Emily and Jack had already been through so much and things were not likely to change for the better anytime soon for them. It had the least satisfying ending for me personally, even if I did like the forbidden love aspect of their relationship. Next, I would list the grand end. It was super exciting with all the things it was teasing for the sequel, but alas, said sequel does not exist, so I could not rank this epilogue higher than this. Next up would be Lupin's for me. I adored that they were secretly meeting up at school with no one else being the wiser as to who John really was. The Pendleton-Lupin team-up was also incredible to see when Emily got herself into trouble, and the very romantic ending at the hotel where that boy got her mashed potatoes, which was perfect. Oh yeah, there may have been like some fun times implied there too, which that was fine, I guess. Mashed potatoes, that sold it for me. I'm just saying, mashed potatoes are pretty great. At number 2, I would put Akachi's epilogue. I was so not prepared for the angst of that epilogue. I was so excited and thrilled that it actually took place in Japan, and it so tugged at my heartstrings to see literally everybody trying to keep these two star-crossed lovers apart. I'm so thankful that he made it back to that boat on time, even though I still want to punch Pendleton in the face for letting Emily cry so brokenheartedly over him after he had helped Akachi and Kobayashi onto the boat. Rude butler deserves a punch sometimes. Ugh. And finally, at number 1, I'd have to put Holmes. I thoroughly enjoyed his epilogue. I was not prepared for the spiciness of that epilogue. Boy likes to make out with his girl a lot. So much so that he couldn't focus on cases anymore. That was amazing. And I also adored the ending where she literally moves into the same flat to set up a rival detective agency with Hudson. That's just such a perfect ending for the two of them, and I loved it to bits. And with that, I am done yakking. Whew. If you managed to listen to all of that, then I thank you most sincerely. I didn't think this would be so long, but I had a lot to say apparently about this amazing game. I would definitely recommend it to anyone, especially anyone who's a fan of the mystery historical fiction genre. It was definitely top tier, and I'm so glad I had the opportunity to play it. Thank you all so much once again for watching. It's been lovely, and I hope you all will share with me your list as well. If you would like to answer the bonus award nonsense I made up here, feel free. And if you have special mentions of your own too, then I'd love to read them. And so with that, farewell, London Detective Mysteria. I shall miss you, and if ever there is by some sliver of a chance that you get that long-awaited sequel, then I shall be racing back to this world in a heartbeat. And with that said, I've got a few more routes to finish up with on Magical Diary before we move on to our new games, so I hope I will see you over there, guys. Either way, though, just want to say thanks once more for joining me for this. I hope you all enjoyed it, and until next time, I will see you later.